I did start dancing first. I had a choice between dancing and basketball. But I chose, I started dancing and it just wasn't a very friendly environment for me. So then I ended up choosing basketball and that's how I stayed. But then I ended up, just playing social comp as a kid. And then, I started playing when I was 8. And so when I was 11, I tried out for the rep team, which was under 12s. And I ended up playing reps from under 12s all the way to under 18s with the same club. And during that time, I made some junior state teams as well. So in Australia, when we have junior state teams, it's split up usually either north and south or country and metro. So metro being any of the clubs within the city comp, and then country being everything outside of that. So I played for New South Wales country. And then I played for the ACT, which is where, our capital Canberra is, for under 20s. And by that stage of under 20s and I'd finished high school, I moved to Canberra with the hope of making the ACT Academy of Sports basketball program, which to me was kind of like the second option, because growing up I wanted to make the Australian Institute of Sport, but I never got there. So I wanted to move to Canberra to play for ACT Academy of Sport. But the year I moved there, they stopped funding the basketball program. So that was a bit of a blow. But in Canberra, they have a really good basketball program there anyway. And they had a direct pathway to a WNBL team being the Canberra Capitals, who are now the UC Caps because they've got a partnership with the University of Canberra. So I started playing semi-pro down there and eventually made my way up to the Capitals. That's pretty much my basketball journey in a nutshell. And then I came to broadcasting with the podcast, and commentating came first, where I kind of took the opportunity as it came to commentate our local semi-professional league a couple years ago. And then that kind of stuck. And when I was doing some Sydney Flames games in, I think, 2019, I met Paul and Mary, who created the podcast called Shooting the Breeze. And last year they invited me to join for a couple of episodes about the Olympics. And ever since then, I've just stayed as a co-host on the podcast. So that, in a nutshell, has been my playing journey and how I got into broadcast.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So you're from Australia. Also, so excited that you have South African parents. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, of course. That's why when you asked me to be on the podcast, I was like, that's a no-brainer. Of course I'd love to be on the podcast.
So you describe yourself as hustling to promote the women's game. What do you see as some of the challenges that the women in Australia are facing in the basketball space?
The biggest challenge right now is, I think it's probably one of two things. So the first being the pay disparity. The WNBL is the professional league in Australia, women's professional league in Australia, and it's the longest running women's professional league in Australian history. So it's been going for 42 years now. We're about to have its 43rd season starting in November. And we can see that the pay gap between male and female players is still pretty big. So the Melbourne Boomers, who are the current WNBL champions, they have a documentary that's just started last night, actually, here in Australia, called Sidelined. And one of the big themes coming through in that documentary is still the pay disparity. So we have, females in our professional league who are still having to work full-time jobs to supplement the income that they're making as a, professional athlete when they're playing in the WNBL. And the thing that people don't understand is that when they compare it to men's and women's league, and their first argument is that the women aren't good enough to be paid as much as men, that's because the thing is, it's the circular reasoning around that's because the men are paid well enough to be able to do sport full time. They don't have to take up a second job that's not only going to take up a lot of time away from training and rehab and putting time in the gym. They also have enough pay to allow them to do that. So if we want the women's league to be just as good as the men's league, as all of those couch critics say, we have to supply our female players with the same pay, so they're provided the same time and opportunity to develop their game just as well as the men do. So that's probably the biggest challenge. But I think also another challenge is our exposure in the mainstream media. Like I said, WNBL is the longest running female professional league in the country. It's boasted a really strong history and a lot of important athletes, not just for Australian basketball, but for basketball, women's basketball internationally. So, you know, we've had the likes of Lauren Jackson, Penny Taylor, Christy Harrower, all play WNBL, and they have all been stars on the international stage as well, whether it's playing for the Opals or even in the WNBA. And they're not household names. And I think that's something that doesn't stick right with me. The household names are, you know, Lauren Jackson is probably a household name, but the other is Liz Cambage. And for that to be a representation of what Australian women's basketball is also doesn't really stick right with me. So I think we need to do a lot better job of pushing the WNBL to the forefront. But that is definitely going to come from better administrative implementation of plans in terms of media coverage or media partnerships, or even having alternative media spaces like us as a podcast, or there's a lot of really good basketball blogs in Australia and other podcasts too that dedicate so much free time to promoting the sport, but they have very limited access to content and to players and press conferences and things like that to keep their I guess listeners and participants engaged. So that's probably the two biggest problems I see in Australia.
Yeah, it kind of feels like almost all around the world we're fighting for the same thing in terms of, you know, women's sport, which is the disparity in pay, but also just, you know, the media coverage and promoting the women's game everywhere. So one of the big reasons we chose to interview you now is because you're a couple of days away from Australia hosting the FIBA Women's World Cup. What's it like on the ground leading up to this massive event?
Oh, for me, I have 1 day of work left before I take 2 weeks annual leave. That's going to be dedicated just to the World Cup. So I actually live an hour and a half north of Sydney on the coast. So I will be spending the whole 2 weeks or 10 days in Sydney, staying in an Airbnb and just soaking up every part of the World Cup that I possibly can. So for me personally on the ground, I'm pumped because it's something that I've been excited for and been promoting nearly every day for the last 12 months. And to think that it's only 2 days away is wild. So if I'm already excited now and I'm not even there, I might faint by the time I get there because I'll be so overwhelmed. But I think on the ground, it's a bit hard to gauge. Like on the ground in our basketball community, there's a lot of buzz and people are getting very excited, and you can see a lot more traction on social media now that the World Cup is so close to starting. But I think if you're on the ground in a more general population sense, like I'm trying to tell people at work about, this is why I'm taking leave. I'm going to the Women's Basketball World Cup. It's in Sydney and people didn't know it was on. They didn't know it was in Sydney. Even trying to get people from my local basketball community who may not have their finger on the pulse as much as others in terms of what goes on past the NBA, just trying to get them involved as well has been a little bit tricky. So it needs a little bit more attention. But I think for us basketball fans, especially those, you know, in the media space, we're all really, really excited. And especially because obviously Lauren Jackson's coming back. It's on home soil. Australia hasn't hosted the Women's World Cup since '94. And when we did, I think we got a silver or bronze medal at that World Cup. But I think the other big thing for the Opals is they've had such a turbulent 12 months, starting just before Tokyo Olympics, that they are probably going to come out feeling like they have something to prove, and probably a little bit of redemption as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that they're excited to get going. You know, I think for a lot of professional players, the opportunity to play at home for an international competition is quite special. You touched on Lauren Jackson. So leading up to the World Cup, she was the big news coming out of the Opals camp, you know, her inclusion in the squad. What do you think of that? And how do you think the Opals will do?
Oh, I'm really excited that LJ is back in the Opal squad, especially so she can play her 5th World Cup on home soil. I think for the sport in general and the representation of the Opals program, it's really, really important that she's playing in Sydney. It's going to allow the game a lot more attention and the attention that it deserves. And hopefully it will be able to pull a bigger crowd of old and new, because she's played for so long at such a high level. She's got this kind of transgenerational cross-section of fans. So I'm hoping that her inclusion will be able to pull all of those fans into the stands, so to speak, and come and watch. But I'm really, really happy for her that she's included in the squad. She was treated just like any other athlete. You know, she had to go through the trial process. She had to be invited to camp. She had to make selections and things like that, just like everyone else. And to think that her career ended, with knee injuries and then a staph infection from a bad leg wax, all those years ago, and she found a way to fight back. It's just such a great fairy tale story, especially now that it gets to keep going on home soil. So it's really amazing to see her back. She's just got such a presence about her, because she played in my local semi-professional league called NBL1 East. So East being the league in New South Wales, the state that I live in. And I got to commentate her a few times this year, and just her presence is it's just like a gravitational pull wherever she is. She doesn't have to do anything. She just has this presence that has such a positive impact on her teammates and on other people. So just having her there in that sense is super important as well. But I really think the Opals are going to get on the podium at this World Cup. I'm really confident. Okay. They have a really good mix of, really experienced players who are able to provide that maturity and set a really high standard for some of the newer players into the Opals program, and especially their first time playing at the World Cup. So the likes of Christy Wallace, it will be her World Cup debut, Annalie Maley as well. Sarah Blissards, she was in the Tokyo Olympic squad, but this will be her first World Cup. So it's really good to have people like Kayla George and Lauren Jackson and Tess Madgen, who's recently been named the Opals captain, being able to cement this Opals team to set a really high standard and high culture for some of the young people. And yeah, I really, really think they've got a tough pool. They've got a really tough group, but I really think that they can come through, especially with the home crowd behind them, and get on the podium.
Okay, so you predict Australia getting on the podium. What are some of the other teams you think will be on the podium? Tell me your 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, 1, 2, and 3. That's tricky. That's very tricky. I mean, you can't count out the USA in any sense. They will find a way to get on the podium. So, yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but they're probably likely to win. But the other spot on the podium is going to be really, really tight. I think some of the teams I'm most looking forward to, especially for that podium position, is going to be Belgium. Belgium were really good at the Olympics, and they have really found their groove when it comes to the Euro Cup as well. Typically, I guess historically, not someone you would consider to be quite a threat in women's basketball, but right now they've got a really good combination of players, and a lot of the style of play that they've implemented at the Olympics really suited their roster. So I think Belgium are going to be a bit of a dark horse. Can't count out the likes of Serbia. Serbia's defense is the one, really, really tough defense is the one thing that is going to put a damper on a lot of teams, and that might see them even as high as the podium. But I think now Japan's an interesting one. Japan have been very successful as well in the last 12 to 24 months, especially dominating the Asia Cup, but also they performed so well at the Olympics. However, they are going to be coming to the World Cup under a different coach, and they're also going to be missing one of their key players. So it's going to be interesting to see how well they adapt in such a short period of time with a new coach and missing a key player, to see if they can get on the podium. But yeah, it's super tight. It's super, super tight. But I think, given that I'm back in the Opals for a podium spot and the US as well, I think that second spot could be a split between Belgium, Serbia, or Japan.
Okay, evening it out there, not making a hard call on
No,
the
no,
final
I'm
podium
so
spot.
so indecisive with that stuff because I overanalyze everything and then I go down a rabbit hole. So it's I'm not very good at that kind of stuff sometimes.
You spoke about some of the players we should look out for that play for the Opals, but who else are you excited to see play, from some of the other teams?
Emma Misserman from Belgium for sure. She has her career is just on this upward trajectory. So I'm really, really excited to see her play in the flesh. I really like her style of play too. She's a really great role player and her skill set's quite varied. So that's why I really like her as a player. So I'm looking forward to seeing her. Also, Jonquel Jones. So she wasn't someone who was really on my radar. And to be honest, I don't have a strong understanding, or I'm not quite as well across the WNBA as I am obviously with WNBL, because that takes up enough time, to be honest. But Jonquel Jones was only really put on my radar, say, in the last 12 to 18 months, especially when she started playing for Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then she's kind of got the momentum coming off a really strong final series for the Connecticut Sun. So, with adequate rest time now that the finals, well, I can't really say adequate rest time because the last game was only today. But she'll have, some rest time, I guess, with airplane flight and hopefully all of the recovery gadgets that you can get now. I'm hoping that she'll get here in Sydney as soon as she can, be able to recover well enough and, perform really well. So I think the momentum's going in her favor, but recovery time might be against her. But I'm very excited to see what she brings to the world stage.
So one of the things you spoke about a little bit earlier, you touched on Liz Cambage and everything that's gone on there. What was kind of the response and the story in the Australian media when she left the WNBA?
I don't think people, from Australia's perspective, I don't think people were surprised, to be honest, because it seems like to be a bit of a pattern of behavior with Liz Cambage where she is very open with what she wants and she will go after it until she gets it, which is fair enough. But then once she gets it, her commitment, to a particular team or program is wavering, so to speak. Sorry, I just need to cough for a sec. Sorry. So I think people weren't really surprised with her exit from the Sparks. Kind of see the writing on the wall a little bit with her reduced court time. Sorry. And especially since she did a similar incident occurred, just before, literally just before the Olympics started last year, where Cambage decided to leave the team. For whatever reasons, what happened or what she cited, whatever, the thing is she left the team and didn't see through that commitment. So I don't think people were surprised when she left the Sparks. The interesting thing about what happened at the Olympics last year is that when it happened, at the time it happened, the weeks just before the Olympics, there was the incident with the Nigerian team, and then Cambage announcing that she's leaving and she's not going to participate in the Olympics. We knew all of that here in Australia, like straight away. We didn't know, like the details of the incident with the Nigerian team wasn't widely known, but some of us who are privy to the Australian basketball gossip, which is, nothing sacred when it comes to the Australian basketball gossip landscape. We knew what happened. We had heard the reports of what happened, of the incident and the racial slurs, and we had heard the context of what had happened. So we knew last year already what had gone on. So for us, we were waiting for the consequence and for what was going to be the punishment for such a thing. And I think Basketball Australia released a very passive response to the incident. And my understanding is that she didn't really receive any kind of punishment or ramification for what she did. So
Yeah.
so we were already, us as Australian fans, we were already hurt by that and holding on to that. You know, we kind of resented that whole situation. So for when Cam Beige then signs with the Sparks, and then they're doing this big write-up, and Magic Johnson's doing this big write-up about how wonderful she is and how great she's going to be for the club. And we were like, oh, do you guys really know what you're buying into? And then because I think a bit long time had passed, then there was a big tell-all article about what actually happened in that Nigeria game, because we had people willing to put their name to witness statements by then. So then it could be published with, proper, with reputable recounts from people who were there. So then it's like we had to live the whole story again. And so by the time those stories and that article came out saying exactly what happened and who was there to give evidence, then it got to America, and you could see online people, American fans were just saying, what is this story? We knew nothing about this. This is so surprising. And so for us in Australia, like, you guys are like 12 months behind.
Yeah.
And why are you surprised? Like, it was like reliving that whole thing again. And it's like for the mainstream Australian, population, that's all they knew of Australian women's basketball was, what did Liz Cam Beige do again? Didn't she say something to the Nigerian team? And I was like, it's not the story or the incident that I want Australian women's basketball to be known for, because there's such a rich history there. But no, we weren't surprised when she left the Sparks.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult when it's a negative thing, that puts the sport that you love on the map, as opposed to people talking about all the great things that are happening, within your sport. They're just fixated on this one thing, and she becomes, like you're saying, the representation of that sport. So, but we've seen across the globe the growth of the women's game, and the improvement of women's leagues. Where do you think women's basketball is headed from here?
Yeah, you're totally right. It's definitely been growing more and more in the last at least 12 months. I certainly hope it keeps heading in that upward trajectory as well, and in the right direction. I think, what I really feel like was a strong catalyst for some of this change was when there was the NCAA finals last year. And I think it was all at one venue, because it was all it's usually at one venue, but because of the COVID controls, some of the resources available to those NCAA athletes were, they had gyms and meals and things like that, all in common spaces. And when the female athletes started to post what they were provided versus what the male athletes were provided, and there was this literal comparison of, we are at the same tournament, we're competing for the same title, and look at the disparity in what we've been provided just based on gender. I think that going online from the athlete's perspective was really powerful. And I really think that put a spotlight on, okay, look, this is actually a problem. We're not making it up or being hysterical females, as we can often be painted as. I think that was a real strong catalyst for change. And since then, I've seen a lot more people coming out in support, especially for the NCAA athletes. But the WNBA has been breaking record numbers. The NCAA women's final had record numbers. And we're also seeing some really great stories from other women's sport, like the women's soccer final in England recently, when England won the championship. And I can't remember another sporting event I saw online recently, but it's all heading in a positive direction. But I think what we need to do better is, it's so easy for us just to say, oh, look, the one part is the comparison to men is still this kind of like archaic idea that we're not as good as them. And it's like, well, we're not provided with the same resources, so how can we be better if we don't have the same? Or how can we be as good if we aren't provided the same? But I think also as women, we need to do a better job of supporting each other. So it could be even just as small as, like, if your best friend makes the state team and you don't, send your friend a text to congratulate them. Put a post on social media stories that's saying, hey, my friend made a team. Congratulations to making the state team, great job, friend. I think we need to do a better job as women of supporting each other in that sense as well, celebrating each other's achievements rather than seeing it as a point of competition between us as individuals, because ultimately we're going to be stronger when we keep supporting each other. And when we come across some of those barriers of, pay disparity and broadcast rights and attendance and things like that, if we're all showing support for each other from the top down, then I think the fans and the media and other people that we need to engage with are going to see that it's going to be like a legitimate thing when, from an administrative point and from the athlete's point of view, that it's really important. And I think more fans, old and new, are going to have a stronger engagement and buy-in into what we're kind of selling, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about that, because it's not just women supporting each other, in the basketball space, basketball women supporting each other, but it's also across sporting codes, right? When women support other women's sports as well, it grows those brands too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing is, especially at WNBA games, I think it has to come from a really high administrative point as well. So the thing that recently annoyed me was that the WNBA had their All-Star weekend, which should be the highlight of the weekend. And then they put it on the same weekend as the Summer League, like the NBA Summer League. And so some of my friends went to the NBA Summer League this year, and they said the games actually aren't that good. It's just you go there for fun. You're there in Vegas. It's great for networking and meeting players and other media outlets and peers. But in a sense of the quality of games, it's not that good. But they put the NBA Summer League the same weekend as the WNBA All-Star weekend. And that anything NBA related, regardless of the quality, just completely overshadows anything WNBA related. So why is it that the NBA isn't supporting the women's league just as much as the men to put something like the All-Star weekend at the front and center? And I have a feeling that part of that, I think it was part of the All-Star broadcast was delayed because of a lacrosse game or something like that. Those kinds of things that needs to end. Like if we really want to take women's sports seriously, then the women's sports administrative bodies have to take themselves seriously and start advocating to put the sport at the forefront. I don't want to delay because of a lacrosse game. Like, honestly, this is the biggest women's basketball league in the world. Shouldn't come second to a lacrosse game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to hear you speak, because I think we all face on an administrative level, it doesn't matter in what country, just that, that lack of consideration and prioritization of the women's game, which is quite frustrating.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's at the same time, you can't say, I wish we had more attendance numbers, or I wish we had better viewership on the broadcast. And it's like, yeah, but we got to also tell people why it's worth watching and put it at the forefront, and in some respects really shove it in people's faces to make people take notice. But yeah, I really feel like athletes themselves can do a better job of that as well, like posting when game day's on, or even fan engagement on social media is such a powerful tool, because you're not only going to have the meaningful engagement of your existing fans, but you could have access, you could be more accessible to new fans. But yeah, it's got to be a very kind of collaborative effort between administrative bodies and athletes, I think, to promote our sport a lot better. But all things, I know I went on a bit of a negative tangent, but all things considered, I still think it's going in a positive direction. And now with the World Cup in Sydney, the Basketball Australia and the WNBL really need to capitalise on having the world stage in our backyard to increase female participation, and whether they're as a spectator or a player, or even trying to get or keeping especially young female athletes involved in the game somehow. So it's a perfect opportunity for us to jump on that upward trajectory here in Australia and keep participation up.
Yeah, so we're going to finish this off with a couple of rapid fire questions.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them have to do with your faves. Ready?
Yes.
Couple of your favorite things. Favorite basketball player right now?
Off the top of my head, Annalie Maley, but I'm also a big fan of Steph Talbot.
Okay, favorite basketball player of all time?
All time. Penny Taylor.
Nice.
Mm.
Big fan. Favorite basketball shoes?
Oh, so I have really bad feet, so I actually can't wear any of those cool basketball shoes. I have to wear like hardcore structured netball shoes, like Asics. Otherwise, game over for my joints. But and I can't really tell the difference between the Kobe's and the Kyries and the LeBrons and the Durants and the Paul Georges. But I think from memory, I think I like the Kyries the best, I think.
Okay. Favorite basketball movie?
Oh, Love and Basketball. I used to grow up, we watched that a lot as teenagers, and we used to quote the film at training, especially if someone shot a three and left their follow through up there. We'd call them Monica. Like the main character, how she does that at college training and then she gets in trouble for being arrogant and gets subbed off. So yeah, Love and Basketball for sure is definitely my favorite basketball movie.
Last one, WNBL or WNBA?
Oh, bias, WNBL for me. It's purely for a sentimental and I guess more meaningful connection, the WNBL, because I grew up watching it. I had the opportunity to play WNBL, and a lot of my friends got to play, and I still know people involved in the game at that level in some way. So it almost feels like distant family in a sense. So for the sentimental reasons, I have to say WNBL.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being on here and, chatting basketball, but also chatting Women's World Cup. Have a fantastic time at the World Cup. And how do people find you on social media and your podcast? How do we catch Shooting the Breeze?
So Shooting the Breeze is on most podcast platforms. We're definitely on Apple and on Spotify. So you can just go on either of those platforms and type in Shooting the Breeze, and you'll see a logo that has like a sunset in the background and the a female holding a basketball on her shoulder. So that's us. Socials, you can find me on Twitter as S_Squin, which is spelled SQUIN. Very confusing, I know. And I'm on Instagram as just Jacinta_Govid as well, which is a page purely dedicated to cross-promoting the podcast, but also to continually promote women's basketball as well.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Jacinta.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast. I love it.
Cookie, we good?